In the magnificent kingdom of Valdoria, where centuries-old traditions clash with modern ambitions, a shocking secret threatens to tear apart the royal family forever. When King Alexander discovers his wife Queen Isabella's dangerous scheme to bypass rightful succession and crown her son from a previous marriage, the very foundation of the monarchy trembles. What begins as whispered conversations in shadowy palace corridors soon explodes into a full-scale battle for the throne, where loyalty is tested, ancient laws are challenged, and family bonds are shattered beyond repair. As palace staff choose sides, and the media circles like vultures, one question remains. Can the crown survive when those meant to protect it become its greatest threat? Prepare yourself for a story where every smile hides a dagger, every alliance masks betrayal, and the price of power may cost everything the royal family holds dear. The morning sun cast long shadows across the marble floors of Valdoria's royal palace as King Alexander walked through the East Wing, his footsteps echoing in the grand corridors. At 62, he carried himself with the dignity befitting a monarch who had ruled for over 3 decades, though recent months had etched deeper lines around his eyes. The weight of governing a kingdom in changing times pressed heavily on his shoulders, but nothing could have prepared him for what he was about to discover. Alexander had risen earlier than usual, troubled by restless dreams and an inexplicable sense of unease. His wife, Queen Isabella, had been acting strangely for weeks. Their conversations had become stilted, filled with careful pauses and measured words. She spent increasing amounts of time in her private study, claiming to work on charitable foundation matters, but Alexander noticed she would quickly close her laptop whenever he entered unexpectedly. The king's concern deepened when his trusted aide, Marcus Thornfield, had approached him the previous evening with troubling news. Palace staff had reported unusual meetings between the Queen and various political figures, including Lord Chancellor Harrison Blackwood, who had always harbored ambitions beyond his current position. These meetings occurred during times when Alexander was away on official duties or attending to state matters in his own offices. As Alexander approached the Queen's study that morning, he heard voices through the heavy oak door. He recognized Isabella's voice immediately, but the urgency in her tone made him pause. The other voice belonged to someone he couldn't immediately identify, though it carried the polished accent of the aristocracy. The prince must never know about these arrangements, Isabella was saying. Alexander would never understand. He's too bound by tradition, too rigid in his thinking about succession laws. Alexander felt his heart begin to race. Prince David, his only son and heir to the throne, was currently abroad on a diplomatic mission to strengthen trade relations with neighboring kingdoms. Whatever his wife was discussing, it concerned their son's future and apparently required secrecy. Your Majesty, the unknown voice replied, we've carefully reviewed the historical precedents. While unconventional, there are legal pathways to achieve what you desire. The key is timing and ensuring we have sufficient support among the nobility before making any public announcements. The king pressed closer to the door, his mind reeling. Legal pathways to achieve what? What could Isabella possibly want regarding succession that would require such secrecy? Lord Blackwood assures me that once the documentation is properly prepared, we can present it as a fait accompli, Isabella continued. By then, it will be too late for anyone to oppose the arrangement effectively. Alexander's blood ran cold. Documentation? Arrangements? His wife was clearly plotting something significant involving the succession to the throne, and she was doing it behind his back. The king's mind raced through possibilities, none of them comforting. The conversation inside continued, and Alexander caught fragments that made his stomach churn. References to Christopher's rightful claim and correcting historical oversights painted a picture that seemed impossible, yet the evidence was unmistakable. Christopher Montague was Isabella's son from her first marriage to Duke William Montague, who had died in a riding accident 15 years earlier. Christopher, now 31, had always been a charming and intelligent young man whom Alexander had treated as his own stepson. The young man held the title of Earl of Westmore and had served admirably in various diplomatic roles. However, he had never been in the line of succession to the Valdorian throne, as he was not Alexander's biological son. But, as Alexander listened to his wife's conversation, a horrifying possibility began to emerge. Was Isabella attempting to manipulate the succession laws to favor Christopher over Prince David? The marriage certificates and birth records we've discovered change everything, Isabella was explaining to her companion. They prove that my first marriage to William was invalid due to a technicality in the religious ceremony. This means Christopher was born out of wedlock initially, but our subsequent marriage to correct the religious oversight makes him legitimate. More importantly, the documents show that Alexander and I were secretly married 6 months before our public ceremony, which would make Christopher his legal stepson with potential succession rights. Alexander gripped the door frame to steady himself. This was impossible. He remembered their courtship and marriage clearly. There had been no secret ceremony, no prior religious marriage between Isabella and her first husband that was invalid. What his wife was describing was either a complete fabrication or a gross misinterpretation of historical facts. The voice of Isabella's companion became clearer as he moved closer to the door. Alexander now recognized it as Sir Reginald Ashworth, a legal scholar known for his controversial interpretations of constitutional law. The beauty of this approach, Sir Reginald was saying, is that it doesn't directly challenge Prince David's legitimacy. Instead, it creates a joint succession scenario where both princes have equal claims. However, given Christopher's age advantage and extensive diplomatic experience, the Council of Lords would likely favor him as the more suitable immediate heir. Alexander had heard enough. His wife was not only plotting to undermine their son's rightful inheritance, but was also constructing an elaborate legal fiction to do so. The forged or manipulated documents she referenced could only be the result of a carefully orchestrated conspiracy involving multiple parties. The king quietly retreated from the door, his mind spinning with the implications of what he had overheard. Isabella had betrayed not only their marriage vows, but also her duties as queen. She was willing to tear apart the established succession laws and potentially destabilize the monarchy itself to advance her son's position. As Alexander made his way back to his private chambers, he encountered Marcus Thornfield in the corridor. His aide's expression immediately showed concern upon seeing the king's pale complexion. "Your Majesty, are you unwell?" Marcus inquired quietly. Alexander looked at the man who had served him faithfully for over 20 years. Marcus had been there through constitutional crises, family tragedies, and political upheavals. If anyone could be trusted with this explosive information, it was Marcus. "Walk with me to my study," Alexander said quietly. "We need to discuss a matter of utmost urgency and complete confidentiality." Once safely behind closed doors in the king's private study, Alexander related what he had overheard. Marcus listened without interruption, his expression growing increasingly grave. "Sir, this is treason," Marcus said finally. "Attempting to manipulate succession laws through fraudulent documents strikes at the very heart of the constitutional monarchy. The Queen's actions could destabilize not only the royal family, but the entire kingdom." Alexander sank into his chair, suddenly, feeling every one of his 62 years. "The question is, how far has this conspiracy progressed? Who else is involved? And, most importantly, can we stop it before irreparable damage is done?" Marcus began pacing the room, his legal mind analyzing the situation. "We need to understand the full scope of the plot. If Lord Blackwood is involved, as you overheard, then we're dealing with someone who has significant influence in Parliament and among the nobility. We also need to secure any genuine historical documents that might contradict the falsified evidence they're preparing." The king nodded grimly. "And we need to do this without alerting Isabella to our knowledge. If she realizes we've discovered her scheme, she might accelerate her timeline or take even more drastic action." "Your Majesty," Marcus said carefully, "there's something else we must consider. Prince David needs to be informed immediately. If the Queen moves forward with her plan while he's abroad, he could return to find his inheritance challenged by what appears to be legitimate legal documentation." Alexander realized his trusted aide was right. David needed to know about his stepmother's betrayal, but bringing him back suddenly might alert Isabella that her conspiracy had been discovered. "Send David a coded message using our personal family cipher," Alexander instructed. "Tell him that urgent family matters require his discretionary return, but he should not alter his official schedule abruptly. We need him to complete his current diplomatic obligations normally, then return as originally planned. This will give us time to gather evidence while maintaining the appearance that nothing has changed." Marcus nodded and made notes on a small pad he always carried. "I'll also discreetly contact our most trusted allies among the nobility. Lord Edward Pemberton and the Duke of Northumberland have always been loyal supporters. They may have insights into any unusual activities or approaches from Lord Blackwood or his associates." As the two men planned their response to this unprecedented crisis, Alexander couldn't help but reflect on how completely he had misjudged his wife. Isabella had been his companion for over 18 years. He had loved and trusted her, welcomed her son into his family, and believed they shared common goals for the kingdom's future. Now he realized that beneath her gracious public demeanor and apparent devotion, Isabella had harbored ambitions that required deceiving and betraying the man she had sworn to honor and support. The personal pain of this discovery was almost as devastating as its political implications. "Marcus," Alexander said quietly, "I want you to begin a discreet investigation into the Queen's activities over the past year. Financial records, correspondence, meeting schedules, travel itineraries. If she's been planning this conspiracy for months, there will be traces we can follow. Of course, Your Majesty. I'll coordinate with Sir James Morrison from Royal Security. He can access records without raising suspicions, given his regular security briefings and reviews." Alexander stood and walked to the tall windows overlooking the palace gardens. In the distance, he could see Isabella walking among the rose bushes with two of her ladies-in-waiting. She appeared serene and elegant, every inch the dignified queen. The contrast between her public appearance and her private scheming made Alexander feel sick to his stomach. "There's one more thing, Marcus," the king said without turning from the window. "I want you to research the legal precedents surrounding royal marriages and succession laws. If Isabella is basing her claims on manipulated historical documents, we need to understand exactly how such forgeries might be challenged and debunked." "I'll contact Professor Margaret Whitfield at the Royal Institute for Constitutional Studies," Marcus replied. "She's the kingdom's leading expert on succession law and has access to all the original historical documents in the royal archives." As Marcus prepared to leave, Alexander turned back to face him. "Remember, absolute discretion is essential. If word of this conspiracy becomes public before we're prepared to address it properly, it could cause a constitutional crisis that damages the monarchy regardless of whether we prove Isabella's claims are fraudulent." After Marcus left, Alexander remained alone in his study, grappling with the magnitude of what he faced. His wife had not only betrayed him personally, but had also put the entire kingdom at risk. The stability of Valdoria depended on clear succession laws and public confidence in the monarchy's legitimacy. Isabella's scheme, even if ultimately unsuccessful, could plant seeds of doubt about Prince David's rightful claim to the throne. Such doubts could lead to political instability, weaken the monarchy's authority, and potentially provide ammunition for Republican movements that had been gaining subtle influence in certain intellectual circles. The king realized that stopping Isabella's immediate conspiracy would only be the beginning of a much larger challenge. He would need to find a way to address her betrayal while minimizing damage to the royal family's public image and the monarchy's credibility. As afternoon shadows lengthened across his study, Alexander made a decision that would change everything. Isabella's secret plan would indeed be shattered, but the consequences would extend far beyond anything she had anticipated. The queen had chosen to play a dangerous game with the crown itself, and now she would discover that some gambles extract a price higher than anyone is prepared to pay. The battle for Valdoria's future was about to begin, and Alexander knew that when it ended, the royal family would never be the same. 3 days had passed since King Alexander's devastating discovery, and the palace had taken on an atmosphere of tense normalcy. The queen continued her daily routines, attending charitable functions and hosting diplomatic teas, while secretly the king and his trusted allies worked to uncover the full extent of her conspiracy. Marcus Thornfield had proven invaluable in coordinating the discreet investigation. Working closely with Sir James Morrison from Royal Security, they had begun mapping the network of individuals involved in Isabella's scheme. The evidence they uncovered painted a picture of a conspiracy that was both more extensive and more sophisticated than Alexander had initially imagined. Professor Margaret Whitfield arrived at the palace under the cover of conducting routine archival research for a historical publication. Her real mission was to examine the original succession documents and marriage records to prepare a definitive legal response to any falsified claims Isabella might present. The professor, a distinguished woman in her 50s with steel-gray hair and sharp intellect, met with Alexander in the secure environment of the Royal Library's private research room. Ancient leather-bound volumes surrounded them as she spread copies of the original documents across the mahogany table. "Your Majesty," Professor Whitfield began, her voice low but firm, "I've examined all the historical records from the period in question. The marriage ceremony between Queen Isabella and Duke William Montagu was entirely valid according to both civil and religious law. There was no technicality that would invalidate their union, and therefore Christopher Montagu has no claim to royal succession through illegitimacy arguments. Alexander felt a mixture of relief and anger. So the documents Isabella referenced in her conversation are complete fabrications? More than that, sir. Creating false historical documents to alter succession laws constitutes high treason under the Constitutional Monarchy Act of 1689. If the Queen proceeds with this scheme, she would be committing one of the most serious crimes possible against the crown. The professor continued her analysis, pointing to specific passages in the ancient texts. Furthermore, the claim about a secret marriage between you and Queen Isabella 6 months before your official ceremony is impossible to substantiate, because such a marriage would have required witnesses from the nobility and religious authority approval. The official records show no such ceremony took place. Sir James Morrison, who had been quietly listening from his position near the door, stepped forward. Your Majesty, our financial investigation has revealed some disturbing patterns. Over the past 8 months, significant sums have been transferred from the Queen's personal accounts to various individuals, including payments to document restoration specialists and private genealogy researchers. Alexander's jaw tightened. She's been paying people to create false historical evidence. It appears so, sir. We've also discovered that Lord Blackwood has been meeting regularly with several members of Parliament, ostensibly to discuss general constitutional matters. However, the timing and frequency of these meetings suggest he's been building political support for some kind of succession challenge. Marcus entered the private study with additional intelligence that made the situation even more alarming. Your Majesty, we've intercepted communications suggesting that the Queen plans to present her fabricated evidence to the Council of Lords within the next 2 weeks. She's apparently confident that the combination of forged documents and Lord Blackwood's political maneuvering will create enough uncertainty to force a formal succession review. Alexander stood and began pacing, his mind working through the implications. A succession review would require months of legal proceedings, during which the legitimacy of Prince David's inheritance would be publicly questioned. Even if we ultimately prove the Queen's claims false, the damage to the monarchy's stability could be irreversible. Professor Whitfield gathered her documents carefully. Sir, with your permission, I'd like to prepare a comprehensive legal brief that not only debunks the specific claims, but also reinforces the established succession laws. We need documentation that's so thorough and authoritative that any attempt to challenge it would appear frivolous. Proceed with that immediately, Alexander agreed. But, remember, this work must remain absolutely confidential until we're ready to respond to Isabella's allegations. Sir James approached the king with another concern. Your Majesty, there's something else. Our surveillance has detected that Christopher Montagu has quietly returned to the kingdom. He's staying at Lord Blackwood's estate rather than his own residence, which suggests he's aware of his mother's plans and is positioning himself to support them. This news hit Alexander like a physical blow. Christopher had always seemed like an honorable young man, devoted to his diplomatic career and respectful of royal protocols. Learning that he was actively participating in the conspiracy to usurp Prince David's inheritance felt like another personal betrayal. Has Christopher been in contact with Prince David recently? Alexander asked. Marcus consulted his notes. Not according to our communication logs. In fact, Christopher sent a message to Prince David last week expressing regret that diplomatic obligations would prevent them from meeting during David's return journey. At the time, we thought it was simply a scheduling conflict. It appears Christopher was deliberately avoiding contact to prevent Prince David from learning about his presence in the kingdom, Sir James concluded. Alexander realized that Isabella's conspiracy was not just about advancing Christopher's position, but also about keeping Prince David uninformed and unprepared. If David returned to find himself facing a formal succession challenge backed by what appeared to be legitimate historical evidence, he would be at a severe disadvantage. Gentlemen, Professor Whitfield, Alexander addressed his team, we need to accelerate our timeline. Send an urgent but discreet message to Prince David. Tell him that family matters require his immediate but quiet return. He should complete his current negotiations as planned, but then travel home using private transportation rather than official channels. Marcus nodded. I'll arrange for a private jet to collect him from the conclusion of his final diplomatic meeting. That will allow him to return several days earlier than expected without drawing public attention. Professor Whitfield had been studying additional documents while the others talked. Your Majesty, I've discovered something that might work in our favor. The succession laws established by King Frederick III in 1887 include specific provisions for dealing with fraudulent claims to the throne. If we can prove that falsified documents have been created with intent to alter succession, the penalties are severe and automatic. What kind of penalties? Alexander inquired. Complete removal from any line of succession for the claimant, and loss of all royal titles and privileges for anyone who knowingly participated in the fraud. In Christopher's case, he would lose his earl title and be barred from any future position within the royal household or government. Alexander felt a grim satisfaction at this revelation. Isabella's scheme could ultimately destroy not just her own position, but also Christopher's legitimate standing within the nobility. She was risking everything on a gamble based on fabricated evidence. Sir James received a communication on his secure device and immediately approached the king. Your Majesty, we have confirmation that Queen Isabella has scheduled a private meeting with the Lord Chief Justice for tomorrow afternoon. This suggests she's moving to the final phase of her plan. The Lord Chief Justice, Sir William Hertford, was the highest judicial authority in the kingdom and would be responsible for evaluating any formal succession challenge. If Isabella presented her falsified evidence to him, the legal proceedings could begin before Alexander had a chance to expose the conspiracy. We need to act tonight, Alexander decided. Marcus, arrange for Sir William to receive an urgent private briefing from Professor Whitfield first thing tomorrow morning, before his meeting with the Queen. He needs to understand the legal and historical context before Isabella can present her fabricated claims. Professor Whitfield began gathering her materials. I can have a complete brief prepared within hours. The evidence against the Queen's claims is overwhelming once you understand the historical and legal framework she's attempting to manipulate. As the meeting concluded, Alexander remained behind with Marcus to discuss the most difficult aspect of the situation, confronting Isabella directly. Sir, Marcus said carefully, once we've secured the legal position and ensured Prince David's return, you'll need to decide how to handle the Queen's betrayal. This goes beyond political maneuvering into personal territory that will affect your marriage and family relationships permanently. Alexander had been dreading this conversation, but Marcus was right. Even after stopping Isabella's immediate scheme, the fundamental breach of trust would remain. How could he continue to share a throne and a life with someone who had proven willing to betray everything they had built together? There's also the question of Christopher's future, Marcus continued. If he's voluntarily participating in this conspiracy, his relationship with the royal family will never recover, regardless of the legal outcomes. Alexander walked to the window, looking out at the gardens where he had seen Isabella walking just days earlier. Everything had seemed normal then, but now he understood that appearance had been a carefully maintained facade hiding months of planning and deception. Marcus, I want you to prepare several different response scenarios, the king instructed. We need to be ready for various possibilities depending on how Isabella reacts when her conspiracy is exposed. If she realizes her scheme has failed, she might attempt even more desperate measures. That evening, Alexander attended the regular family dinner, a weekly tradition that now felt like an elaborate performance. Isabella sat across from him, discussing charity events and social obligations with apparent sincerity, while Christopher's empty chair served as a silent reminder of the deception surrounding them. I do hope David returns safely from his diplomatic mission, Isabella commented, her voice carrying what seemed like genuine maternal concern. International travel can be so unpredictable these days. Alexander studied his wife's face carefully, searching for any sign of the calculating ambition he now knew lay beneath her gracious exterior. Her performance was flawless, making him wonder how many other deceptions he had failed to detect over the years. David has always been responsible and capable, Alexander replied carefully. I have complete confidence in his judgment and abilities. He noticed Isabella's slight reaction to his emphatic support of their son. Her eyes flickered with what might have been annoyance or concern, suggesting that his words had struck closer to home than she wanted to reveal. After dinner, Alexander retired to his private study to review the intelligence reports Marcus had compiled throughout the day. The scope of Isabella's conspiracy continued to expand as more details emerged. Financial records showed payments to historians, legal scholars, and even a document forgery specialist with expertise in aging paper and ink to match historical periods. The Queen had been preparing this scheme for nearly a year, suggesting that her betrayal ran much deeper than a recent opportunistic decision. She had been systematically planning to undermine Prince David's inheritance while maintaining the appearance of a loving stepmother and devoted wife. A secure message arrived confirming that Prince David had received their coded communication and would begin his journey home within 48 hours. Alexander felt relief knowing that his son would soon be present to defend his rightful inheritance, but he also dreaded the inevitable family confrontation that would shatter their lives forever. As midnight approached, Alexander made final preparations for the next day's crucial confrontation. Professor Whitfield's legal brief would expose Isabella's fabricated evidence. Sir William Hertford would understand the true historical and legal situation before meeting with the Queen, and Prince David would be safely returning home. Isabella's secret plan was about to be shattered completely, but Alexander knew that destroying her conspiracy would only be the beginning of a much more painful process of dealing with the personal and political aftermath of her betrayal. The Queen had chosen to gamble everything on a scheme built on lies and deception, and now she would face the consequences of that choice. Tomorrow would bring the first direct confrontation in what Alexander now understood would be a battle not just for the throne, but for the very soul of the royal family itself. The morning of reckoning arrived with deceptive calm. Alexander woke before dawn, his mind sharp despite the sleepless hours spent preparing for what would likely be the most difficult day of his reign. The palace moved through its usual routines, but beneath the surface, a carefully orchestrated plan was unfolding that would expose Queen Isabella's conspiracy and forever alter the royal family's future. Professor Whitfield had worked through the night, preparing a comprehensive legal brief that methodically dismantled every aspect of Isabella's fabricated claims. At precisely 8 o'clock, she arrived at the Lord Chief Justice's chambers for what would prove to be one of the most consequential meetings in the kingdom's constitutional history. Sir William Hertford, a man whose integrity and legal scholarship were beyond reproach, listened with growing amazement as Professor Whitfield presented her findings. The falsified documents, the manipulated historical records, and the conspiracy to alter succession laws painted a picture of systematic deception that shocked even his experienced judicial mind. Professor Whitfield, Sir William said after reviewing the evidence, "Are you absolutely certain of these conclusions? The implications are staggering." "Sir William, I have spent my entire career studying constitutional law and royal succession. These documents the Queen intends to present are not just historically inaccurate. They are deliberate fabrications created specifically to support false claims. The evidence is overwhelming and irrefutable." Meanwhile, Marcus Thornfield coordinated with Sir James Morrison to ensure that every aspect of Isabella's conspiracy network was monitored. Lord Blackwood's movements, Christopher Montague's activities, and the Queen's own preparations were all under discreet surveillance. At 10:30, Isabella made her way to the Lord Chief Justice's chambers, carrying a leather portfolio containing what she believed were the documents that would secure Christopher's path to the throne. She had spent weeks rehearsing her presentation, confident that the combination of seemingly legitimate historical evidence and Lord Blackwood's political support would create an unstoppable momentum toward a succession review. Alexander waited in his private study, receiving regular updates through secure communications. The next few hours would determine whether Isabella's conspiracy could be stopped before it caused irreparable damage to the monarchy's stability. "Your Majesty," Sir William said when Isabella entered his chambers, "I understand you wish to discuss matters relating to royal succession?" Isabella settled into her chair with practiced grace, her demeanor radiating the confidence of someone who believed she held winning cards. "Sir William, I have discovered historical documents that shed new light on succession laws and the legitimacy of various claims to the throne. I believe these findings require formal legal review." She opened her portfolio and began presenting the carefully crafted forgeries, explaining her interpretation of events with conviction that would have been persuasive to someone who hadn't already examined the authentic historical records. "As you can see," Isabella continued, "these marriage certificates clearly show that my first union with Duke William was religiously invalid, making Christopher technically illegitimate at birth. However, the subsequent correction of the religious ceremony, combined with the secret marriage between King Alexander and myself that predates our public ceremony, creates a legal framework under which Christopher could be considered Alexander's legitimate stepson with succession rights." Sir William listened without interruption, allowing Isabella to present her entire argument before responding. His expression remained neutral, giving no indication that he had already reviewed authentic documents that completely contradicted her claims. "Your Majesty," Sir William said finally, "these are indeed serious allegations that would require extensive investigation if proven authentic. However, I must inform you that I have already conducted a preliminary review of the historical records in question." Isabella's confident smile faltered slightly. "I'm sorry, Sir William, but I don't understand." "What preliminary review?" "Professor Whitfield brought to my attention this morning that false documents might be presented in an attempt to manipulate succession laws. After examining the authentic historical records, I can definitively state that the documents you have presented are fabrications." The color drained from Isabella's face as the magnitude of her situation became clear. Her carefully planned conspiracy was crumbling before her eyes. And, worse, her attempt to commit treason had been anticipated and prepared for. "That's impossible," Isabella stammered. "These documents were authenticated by experts. Professor Whitfield must be mistaken." Sir William opened his own portfolio, containing copies of the original historical records. "Your Majesty, I have here the authentic marriage certificate between you and Duke William, properly witnessed and recorded. Your first marriage was entirely valid, making Christopher legitimate, but having no bearing on royal succession. Furthermore, there is no record of any secret marriage between you and King Alexander, nor could such a marriage have taken place without proper witnesses and documentation." Isabella realized that her conspiracy had not only failed but had been completely exposed. The fabricated documents she had paid substantial sums to create were worthless, and her attempt to alter succession laws had been revealed as deliberate fraud. "Sir William, surely there must be some misunderstanding," Isabella tried desperately. "These documents were provided by reputable historians and genealogists. Your Majesty, creating false historical documents to alter royal succession constitutes high treason under the Constitutional Monarchy Act of 1689. The penalties for such actions are severe and automatic. I am required by law to report this matter immediately to His Majesty the King." Isabella's composure finally cracked completely. The gracious queen who had entered the chambers confident of her conspiracy's success was replaced by a desperate woman facing the collapse of everything she had worked toward. "Sir William, please, there must be some way to resolve this misunderstanding without involving the king," Isabella pleaded. "Your Majesty, this is not a misunderstanding. You have attempted to commit treason against the crown using fabricated evidence. There is no legal framework for resolving such matters quietly or privately." While Isabella's world was falling apart in the Lord Chief Justice's chambers, Alexander received confirmation that Prince David had arrived safely and was being transported to the palace through discreet routes. The timing was perfect. David would be present for the family confrontation that could no longer be avoided. Marcus entered Alexander's study with the expected but still devastating news. "Your Majesty, Sir William has confirmed that the Queen attempted to present falsified documents claiming to alter succession laws. He is formally reporting the matter as an act of high treason." Alexander closed his eyes briefly, feeling the weight of the moment. Despite his anger at Isabella's betrayal, hearing the official confirmation that his wife had committed treason against the crown was almost unbearable. "Bring the Queen to the throne room in 1 hour," Alexander instructed. "Ensure that Prince David is present, and arrange for Christopher Montague to be escorted from Lord Blackwood's estate. If he has participated willingly in this conspiracy, he needs to face the consequences alongside his mother." Prince David arrived at the palace that afternoon, still unaware of the full scope of his stepmother's betrayal. Alexander embraced his son, feeling relief at having him safely home, but dreading the pain that the coming revelations would cause. "Father, your message indicated urgent family matters," David said with concern. "Has something happened to Isabella or Christopher?" Alexander studied his son's face, seeing the genuine affection David held for his stepmother and stepbrother. What Isabella had done would not just destroy her relationship with Alexander. It would shatter David's trust in people he had loved and respected for most of his life. "David, sit down. What I need to tell you will be difficult to understand and accept." Over the next 30 minutes, Alexander explained the entire conspiracy, watching his son's expressions change from confusion to disbelief to anger. David struggled to reconcile the evidence of Isabella's betrayal with his memories of her maternal care and support throughout his life. "She's been planning this for a year?" David asked, his voice hollow with shock. "While pretending to care about my diplomatic career and future as king?" The evidence is overwhelming, son. Isabella created an elaborate scheme to replace you as heir with Christopher, using falsified documents and political manipulation. David stood and walked to the tall windows, his hands clenched in anger and hurt. And Christopher? Is he involved willingly? We'll know soon enough. He's being brought here for questioning. At precisely 4 o'clock, the key participants in this royal drama assembled in the throne room. Alexander sat on his throne with Prince David standing to his right, while Isabella was escorted in by royal guards, followed shortly by Christopher Montague. Isabella entered with her head held high, attempting to maintain some semblance of dignity despite her devastating defeat. Christopher appeared confused and apprehensive, clearly aware that something serious was happening but uncertain of the specifics. Queen Isabella, Alexander began, his voice carrying the full authority of his position, you stand accused of high treason against the crown, specifically attempting to manipulate succession laws through the use of falsified historical documents. How do you respond to these charges? Isabella's final facade crumbled as she faced her husband's formal accusation in the presence of both princes. Her voice was barely audible as she replied, Your Majesty, I acted only out of love for my son and concern for the kingdom's future. Love does not justify treason, Alexander responded firmly. Concern for the kingdom does not excuse deception and fraud. Christopher stepped forward, his face pale with realization. Mother, what have you done? What falsified documents? What treason? Isabella turned to her son with tears in her eyes, finally, confronting the magnitude of what her ambitions had cost. Christopher, I wanted to secure your rightful place. You're more qualified, more experienced. The kingdom would benefit from your leadership. By destroying Prince David's legitimate inheritance, Christopher's voice cracked with emotion. By lying and fraud. Mother, I never asked for this. I never wanted the throne if it meant betraying the family that welcomed me. David watched this exchange with a mixture of pain and relief. Learning that Christopher had not been a willing participant in the conspiracy helped preserve at least one family relationship. But the betrayal by Isabella cut deep into his sense of trust and security. Alexander rose from his throne, the weight of kingship heavy on his shoulders. Queen Isabella, by the authority vested in me as King of Valdoria, and in accordance with the Constitutional Monarchy Act of 1689, I hereby strip you of your titles and position as queen. You are banished from the royal household and barred from any future contact with members of the royal family. The pronouncement echoed through the throne room like a final judgment. Isabella's conspiracy had not only failed completely but had cost her everything she had held dear, her marriage, her position, her family, and her future. Christopher knelt before Alexander, his voice breaking as he spoke. Your Majesty, I beg your forgiveness for my mother's actions. I swear by all that is holy that I had no knowledge of this conspiracy and would never have supported it if I had known. Alexander looked down at the young man he had raised as his own son, seeing genuine remorse and pain in his eyes. Christopher, rise. While your mother's actions cannot be forgiven, I do not hold you responsible for conspiracies you did not initiate or support. Isabella's final gamble had ended in complete disaster. Her secret plan to crown her son had not only been shattered but had resulted in her own destruction and near-catastrophic damage to the royal family. The queen who had dreamed of reshaping the succession had instead destroyed her own place in the monarchy's future. As guards escorted the former queen from the throne room for the last time, Alexander knew that while the immediate crisis had been resolved, the deeper work of healing the family and restoring trust would take much longer to accomplish. The weeks following Isabella's dramatic downfall brought challenges that Alexander had never anticipated in his 3 decades of rule. The immediate crisis of the succession conspiracy had been resolved, but the aftermath threatened to create new problems that could undermine the monarchy's stability in ways the original plot never could have achieved. News of the former queen's banishment had leaked to the media within hours of her departure from the palace. Despite the royal household's attempts to control the narrative, speculation ran wild about the reasons behind such drastic action. The official statement spoke only of irreconcilable differences regarding constitutional matters, but journalists and political commentators sensed there was a much larger story beneath the surface. Lord Blackwood, realizing that his association with Isabella's conspiracy had been exposed, attempted to distance himself by claiming he had been deceived about the authenticity of the historical documents. His frantic efforts to avoid prosecution only drew more attention to the affair, making it impossible to keep the details private. Alexander found himself dealing with the most serious constitutional crisis of his reign, not from external threats or political opposition, but from the betrayal of someone who should have been his closest ally and supporter. The personal pain of Isabella's deception was compounded by the practical challenges of managing its political fallout. Prince David struggled to process the revelation that the woman who had raised him for 18 years had been willing to destroy his future for her own son's advancement. The young prince had always prided himself on his ability to judge character and understand people's motivations, but Isabella's betrayal shattered his confidence in his own judgment. "Father," David said during one of their private conversations, "how do we know this won't happen again? If someone so close to us could plan such an elaborate deception, how can we trust anyone in the future?" Alexander had been grappling with the same questions. "Son, we can't allow Isabella's betrayal to make us suspicious of everyone around us. That would be letting her conspiracy achieve a different kind of victory by destroying our ability to trust and lead effectively." But even as Alexander offered this wisdom to his son, he found himself questioning relationships and loyalties he had previously taken for granted. Marcus Thornfield and Sir James Morrison had proven their worth during the crisis, but how many others in the palace might harbor their own secret ambitions? Christopher Montague faced perhaps the most difficult position of all. While Alexander and David had forgiven his unwitting involvement in his mother's scheme, Christopher felt the weight of guilt and shame that made continuing his life as before seem impossible. "Your Majesty," Christopher said when he requested a private audience with Alexander, "I cannot in good conscience continue to hold my title and position knowing what my mother attempted to do to Prince David. I request permission to renounce my earldom and leave the kingdom." Alexander studied the young man who had been like a son to him. Christopher's offer to sacrifice his own position and future demonstrated exactly the kind of honor and integrity that Isabella's conspiracy had lacked. "Christopher, your mother's crimes are not yours to bear. You have served the kingdom honorably and faithfully. I will not allow her betrayal to destroy your life as well. But, sir, how can I remain when my very presence will remind everyone of what happened? The media will never let this story die as long as I'm here serving in diplomatic roles." Alexander realized that Christopher was probably right. The young man's continued presence in the royal household would provide endless fodder for journalists and political opponents who wanted to keep the scandal alive. However, forcing Christopher into exile would feel like another victory for Isabella's destructive ambitions. "Christopher, I propose a different solution. Accept a posting to our embassy in Switzerland for 2 years. It will remove you from the immediate media attention while allowing you to continue serving the kingdom in a meaningful capacity. After the situation stabilizes, you can decide whether to return to your previous role." Christopher's relief was visible. The diplomatic posting offered him a path forward that preserved his honor while acknowledging the practical realities of the situation. Meanwhile, the investigation into the full scope of Isabella's conspiracy revealed disturbing details about the lengths she had gone to in pursuing her scheme. Financial records showed that she had spent over £2 million of her personal funds on document forgery, historical research, and political lobbying. The sophistication of the operation suggested that she had been planning the conspiracy almost from the moment she realized Prince David would eventually inherit the throne. Professor Whitfield's continued research uncovered evidence that Isabella had been corresponding with genealogists and constitutional scholars across Europe, seeking any possible precedent that might support Christopher's claim to succession. When legitimate precedents proved non-existent, she had commissioned the creation of fraudulent ones. "Your Majesty," Professor Whitfield reported, "the forged documents were remarkably sophisticated. The paper, ink, and aging techniques were nearly perfect. If we hadn't had access to the original records for comparison, these fabrications might have been accepted as authentic." The revelation that Isabella's conspiracy had been so professionally executed made Alexander wonder whether similar schemes might be attempted in the future. The monarchy's security protocols had been designed to protect against external threats, not internal betrayal by family members with intimate access to royal documents and procedures. Sir James Morrison began implementing new security measures that would monitor financial transactions, communication patterns, and document access among all royal household members. The measures were necessary for protection but created an atmosphere of suspicion and surveillance that made normal family relationships more difficult. The political ramifications of the scandal extended beyond the immediate royal family. Lord Blackwood's involvement had implicated several members of Parliament who had participated in discussions about potential constitutional changes without understanding their true purpose. While most of these individuals were cleared of wrongdoing, the incident damaged trust between the monarchy and certain political factions. Opposition politicians began calling for broader investigations into royal household operations and financial oversight. Some demanded that Parliament have greater authority over succession laws to prevent future manipulation attempts. These proposals threatened to expand the crisis from a family betrayal into a constitutional battle over the monarchy's independence. Alexander realized that he needed to take decisive action to restore public confidence and demonstrate that the monarchy could address internal problems effectively. Working with Marcus Thornfield and his legal advisors, he developed a comprehensive response that would satisfy public concerns while protecting the crown's essential prerogatives. The king announced the establishment of an independent royal oversight commission that would review all financial transactions, document handling procedures, and security protocols within the royal household. The commission would be staffed by distinguished individuals from outside the palace with expertise in law, finance, and governance. This commission will ensure that what happened with the former queen's conspiracy can never happen again, Alexander stated in his public address. The monarchy must be transparent and accountable while maintaining the dignity and effectiveness that our constitutional system requires. Prince David played a crucial role in rebuilding public confidence by demonstrating grace and maturity in handling the crisis. His public appearances showed no bitterness toward his stepmother or stepbrother, instead focusing on his continued commitment to serving the kingdom and preparing for his future responsibilities as king. Betrayal by those we trust is painful, David said in a carefully crafted statement, but it cannot be allowed to undermine our faith in the institutions and values that unite our kingdom. I remain committed to upholding the honor and dignity of the crown that I will one day inherit. The prince's measured response impressed political observers and helped shift public attention away from the scandal toward his qualifications and character as the future monarch. His handling of the crisis demonstrated exactly the kind of leadership qualities that would serve him well as king. As autumn arrived, the immediate crisis had stabilized, but its deeper implications continued to reshape royal family dynamics. Alexander found himself more isolated than before, having lost not only his wife but also his naive confidence in the people closest to him. The betrayal had aged him visibly, adding gray to his hair and lines to his face that spoke of sleepless nights and constant worry. The practical work of governance continued, but Alexander approached relationships and decisions with a caution that had been absent during his earlier years as king. Every proposal was examined for hidden motives. Every advisor's counsel was weighed against possible ulterior objectives. Marcus Thornfield, recognizing the psychological toll the conspiracy had taken on his king, arranged for Alexander to meet with Dr. Elizabeth Harper, a psychologist who specialized in helping leaders deal with betrayal and trust issues. The sessions, conducted in absolute confidentiality, helped Alexander process his emotions and develop strategies for moving forward. Your Majesty, Dr. Harper explained during one of their meetings, betrayal by someone so close creates trauma that affects not just personal relationships, but also professional judgment. Learning to trust appropriately again requires time and intentional effort. Alexander found these sessions helpful in understanding his own reactions and developing healthier approaches to leadership and relationships. However, the fundamental challenge remained: how to be an effective king while protecting himself from future betrayal. The former Queen Isabella, meanwhile, had disappeared from public view entirely. Reports suggested she had taken refuge in a private estate in France, living under an assumed name to avoid media attention. Her fall from grace had been so complete that even former friends and allies refused to associate with her publicly. Christopher's diplomatic posting to Switzerland provided him with the distance he needed to begin rebuilding his life and career. His reports from the embassy were professional and insightful, demonstrating that his mother's crimes had not diminished his own abilities or integrity. As the year drew to a close, Alexander reflected on how completely Isabella's secret plan had been shattered and how thoroughly her betrayal had been exposed. She had gambled everything on a conspiracy based on lies and deception, and had lost not just her immediate objectives, but everything she had valued in life. The cost of her ambition had been devastating not just for herself, but for everyone around her. Alexander's marriage was destroyed, David's trust in family relationships was damaged, and Christopher's future was forever altered by association with his mother's crimes. Isabella's scheme to crown her son had indeed been shattered, but the shrapnel from its destruction had wounded the entire royal family. The challenge now was to heal those wounds and rebuild the trust and unity that effective monarchy required, knowing that the scars would remain as permanent reminders of how ambition unchecked by honor could destroy everything it claimed to protect. 2 years had passed since the dramatic collapse of Queen Isabella's conspiracy, and the kingdom of Valdoria had gradually settled into a new equilibrium. The immediate shock of the succession crisis had faded, replaced by a deeper understanding of how ambition and deception could threaten even the most stable institutions. King Alexander, now 64, had emerged from the personal and political devastation stronger and wiser, though forever changed by the experience of betrayal. The Independent Royal Oversight Commission had completed its comprehensive review and implemented new safeguards that made future internal conspiracies virtually impossible. Financial transactions were transparent, document access was monitored, and communication patterns were analyzed for unusual activities. While some critics argued that these measures created an atmosphere of excessive surveillance, most observers agreed they were necessary responses to unprecedented betrayal. Prince David, now 26, had grown into his role as heir apparent with remarkable grace and maturity. The crisis that could have destroyed his confidence had instead taught him valuable lessons about leadership, trust, and the complexities of human nature. His public speeches and diplomatic missions demonstrated a depth of understanding that impressed both domestic and international observers. The greatest test of character, David said in his first major policy address, is not how we handle success, but how we respond to betrayal and disappointment. Our kingdom has faced such a test and emerged stronger because we refuse to let deception and ambition undermine our commitment to truth and justice. The prince's words carried special weight because everyone understood the personal cost behind them. His stepmother's betrayal had shattered his childhood innocence about family loyalty, but it had also forged him into a leader who understood that effective governance required both compassion and vigilance. Christopher Montague had thrived in his Swiss posting, proving that his mother's crimes had not diminished his own abilities or integrity. His work at the embassy had earned praise from diplomatic colleagues and foreign ministry officials, demonstrating that he had inherited his father's diplomatic skills rather than his mother's capacity for deception. When Christopher requested a private meeting with Alexander during his brief return to Valdoria for official consultations, the conversation revealed how much both men had grown through their shared ordeal. "Your Majesty," Christopher began, "I want you to know that not a day passes without my gratitude for the grace you showed me during the crisis. Many kings would have banished me alongside my mother, regardless of my innocence." Alexander studied the young man who remained like a son to him despite everything that had happened. "Christopher, you proved your character when you rejected your mother's scheme and chose honor over ambition. That choice defined who you are far more than Isabella's actions defined who she was. I've been thinking about returning to Valdoria permanently," Christopher continued. "My work in Switzerland has been fulfilling, but this is my home. I want to contribute to the kingdom's future if you believe my presence won't be a distraction." Alexander had been anticipating this conversation. Christopher's diplomatic success abroad had demonstrated his value to the kingdom, but his return would inevitably revive media interest in the succession scandal. "Christopher, you have my complete support for returning home. However, I think we need to establish a clear public framework that acknowledges the past while focusing on the future." They developed a plan that would see Christopher appointed as special advisor for European relations, a position that utilized his diplomatic experience while clearly establishing his role as a loyal servant of Prince David's future reign. The appointment would be announced alongside David's formal engagement to Lady Catherine Pemberton, creating positive news that would overshadow any revival of old scandals. Lady Catherine, daughter of Lord Edward Pemberton, had been David's close friend since childhood and had become his romantic partner during the difficult period following Isabella's banishment. Her family's unwavering loyalty during the succession crisis had deepened the bond between the two households, making the engagement both a personal celebration and a political alliance. The announcement of David's engagement created exactly the positive media attention Alexander had hoped for. The kingdom's focus shifted from past betrayals to future celebrations, as preparations began for a royal wedding that would symbolize renewal and hope. During this period of rebuilding, Alexander received an unexpected letter that reopened the most painful chapter of the entire crisis. The letter was from Isabella, writing from her exile in France, requesting permission to attend David's wedding. "My dearest Alexander," the letter began, "I know I have no right to ask anything of you or the family I betrayed. However, I hope that time has allowed you to understand that my actions, however misguided, came from love for my son rather than hatred for yours. I would be deeply honored to witness David's happiness from a distance, as a mother who helped raise him during his childhood years." Alexander shared the letter with David, uncertain how his son would react to this reminder of their former queen's existence. "Father," David said after reading Isabella's request, "I feel no anger toward her anymore, only sadness for what she lost through her own choices. However, her presence at my wedding would create a media circus that would overshadow what should be a celebration of our kingdom's future." Alexander agreed with his son's assessment. Isabella's appearance would inevitably become the story of the wedding, drawing attention away from the positive symbolism they were trying to create. Alexander's response to Isabella was carefully crafted to acknowledge her maternal feelings while firmly maintaining the boundaries her betrayal had established. "Isabella, while I understand your desire to share in David's happiness, your presence would create disruptions that would not serve anyone's interests. I can arrange for you to receive photographs and a private recording of the ceremony, but your exile must remain complete." The letter was the last direct communication between Alexander and the woman who had shared his throne for 18 years. Isabella's final attempt to re-enter their lives had been gently but firmly rejected, closing that chapter forever. As David's wedding approached, the kingdom experienced a renewal of optimism and unity that had been absent since the succession crisis. The prince's choice of bride was universally popular, and the celebration promised to showcase the monarchy's stability and continuity after its recent trials. The wedding ceremony itself became a powerful statement about the royal family's resilience and commitment to their constitutional duties. David's vows included a promise to serve the kingdom with honor, transparency, and unwavering dedication to the truth, words that carried special significance given recent history. Christopher's role as David's best man symbolized the healing that had taken place within the family. His presence at the wedding, standing beside the prince whose inheritance his mother had tried to steal, demonstrated that honor and loyalty could overcome even the deepest betrayals. In his wedding speech, David acknowledged the challenges the royal family had faced while looking toward a future built on stronger foundations. "The crown we serve has been tested by deception and betrayal, but it has emerged purified by truth and strengthened by justice. Catherine and I pledge ourselves not just to each other, but to the principles that make our monarchy worthy of the people's trust." Alexander watched his son and new daughter-in-law with deep satisfaction, knowing that the next generation was prepared to lead with wisdom gained through adversity. The succession crisis that could have destroyed the monarchy had instead created leaders who understood both the privileges and responsibilities of royal service. In the months following the wedding, Alexander began the process of gradually transferring more responsibilities to Prince David, preparing for an eventual transition that would occur on his own terms rather than through crisis or controversy. The process was carefully managed to ensure stability while giving David opportunities to demonstrate his readiness for kingship. Christopher's return to Valdoria was handled with similar care. His reintegration into royal service was accomplished without significant media attention, allowing him to resume his career while the kingdom focused on David and Catherine's new roles as the next generation of royal leadership. On the third anniversary of Isabella's banishment, Alexander held a private ceremony in the palace chapel to formally close the chapter of the succession crisis. Present were David, Catherine, Christopher, Marcus Thornfield, Sir James Morrison, and Professor Whitfield, the people who had either suffered through the betrayal or helped expose it. 3 years ago, this family and this kingdom faced a test that could have destroyed everything we hold dear, Alexander said during the brief service. "We were betrayed by someone we loved and trusted, but we responded with truth, justice, and mercy. Today, we are stronger because we chose honor over revenge, unity over division." The ceremony included the formal sealing of all documents related to Isabella's conspiracy in the royal archives, where they would remain as historical records but would no longer be subjects of ongoing investigation or public discussion. Professor Whitfield presented the final report of her research, which had become the definitive academic study of succession law and the safeguards necessary to protect constitutional monarchy from internal threats. Her work had been adopted by royal families across Europe as a model for preventing similar crises. As Alexander looked around at the people who had helped him navigate the kingdom's darkest hour, he felt a profound sense of gratitude and accomplishment. Isabella's secret plan had indeed been shattered completely, but from its destruction had emerged a stronger, wiser, and more resilient monarchy. The former queen's grand ambition to crown her son had resulted in her own exile and disgrace, while the prince she had tried to disinherit had become a better future king because of the trials he had endured. Christopher, the intended beneficiary of her conspiracy, had chosen honor over advancement and found his own path to meaningful service. Alexander's final reflection on the crisis came during a quiet evening walk through the palace gardens, following the same paths where he had once seen Isabella maintaining her facade of devotion while secretly plotting against their son's inheritance. The roses she had tended still bloomed, but they no longer reminded him of her betrayal. Instead, they symbolized the kingdom's capacity for renewal and growth even after the most devastating betrayals. The king of Valdoria had learned that the greatest threats to the crown often come not from external enemies, but from the ambitions of those closest to power. However, he had also learned that truth, justice, and principled leadership could overcome even the most sophisticated deceptions. Isabella's legacy was one of cautionary destruction, a reminder that unchecked ambition could destroy everything it claimed to protect. But from her failure had emerged a stronger royal family and a more secure kingdom, proving that even the most devastating betrayals could ultimately serve the cause of justice and truth. The crown that Isabella had sought to manipulate for her son's benefit had instead been purified by the fire of her treachery, emerging more legitimate and respected than ever before. In trying to destroy Prince David's inheritance, she had ultimately made him a better heir and future king. As Alexander prepared for the eventual transition of power to his son, he knew with complete confidence that David would rule with the wisdom, integrity, and vigilance that could prevent future betrayals while maintaining the compassion and mercy that made the monarchy worthy of the people's loyalty. Isabella's secret plan had been shattered so completely that even its memory served to strengthen rather than weaken the institution she had tried to corrupt. The kingdom of Valdoria had faced its greatest internal crisis and emerged not just intact, but better prepared for whatever challenges the future might bring.